I just really, really hope that people stop to think about that immediate loss revenue. And like we talked about, it's kind of like I have an image of an iceberg that I use, and the immediate loss revenue is that top that's visible, but underneath the surface is all those things you and I talked about that also walk out the door every time a customer churns. That's kind of like my little soapbox, if you will. I'm trying to get people to realize how important retention and churn are.
And as we've said, at the minimum to X as a service, like anything that is sold as a service, at the minimum. And arguably, because, for example, even if you were to sell like on-premises products, i.e., they purchase it, they go away with it, and they install it on their, I don't know, like a lathe. Yeah. It would be nice to think that they'd come back and buy another lathe from you when they want another lathe, right? So customer loyalty is still important, and you don't want that customer to churn. It costs a lot of money to go and do the marketing to find new customers and build their loyalty and so on and so forth, as we've just been discussing. So I would suggest at a minimum, anyone who sells anything as a service, but I would say actually anyone who's got customers, to be quite honest with you, who wants repeat business. Maybe you run a souvenir shop in a tourist district, and you're not expecting those people to ever come back, and you're selling them ice creams. Yeah, okay. But in B2B, I would suggest you want repeat business.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get into the details, and I'm sure you're well aware, Anita, the famous 20th century management consultant Peter Drucker is famously quoted as saying, "If you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it." I know people argue whether he did say it or not. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's a good expression. So let's talk about measuring and understanding churn, right? Because we can't manage churn if we're not measuring it. And I'm going to add another quote here that I think that you use, if I'm correct, which is from Bill Gates. "Your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning." I think I picked that up as something that was in one of your little sort of marketing aids, and I thought that was quite cool. And I know this is a quotation, that you use when you're talking to your clients about churn reduction. So what is Bill Gates saying here about B2B SaaS companies that they can learn from in terms of understanding the causes of churn?
Right. So that's where I took my, when you were introducing me, and I say, trying to learn what's taking your once happy customers and making them so unhappy that they're choosing to leave. And, Bill's quote, it's probably one of my favorites. And the reason is, again, the quantitative data gives you indication, it can give you trends, it can give you direction, but it's when speaking with them directly, those customers, and it's surveys is, yes, one type of speaking, if you will, but surveys are one way. There's not a dialogue. And at some point you have to have a dialogue, and that can be, we have two choices: focus groups or interviews.
Right.
And that's it. Unless there's a third one that has magically come up recently, there's really not much of a choice. You have to ask. You've got to get them on calls. And it's not just ask a bunch of questions. It's asking structured questions in a certain order that builds trust so that you can really find out what's going on.
Right. Without leading them.
Right. And that's one of the things is, I hear it all the time. Oh yeah, we do interviews. Oh yeah, we do surveys. And then you look, and so to your point, if somebody doesn't know what a leading question is, I'll give you an example. It's where you are leading the customer to an answer that you want just by how you say the question. So that becomes then, that data isn't really accurate to what the customer is saying. So something like, when you've had success with our software before, whatever it might be, well, maybe they haven't had success. So now you're forcing, just by that type of question, you're leading them to talk about when they have had successes previously, and they may not have. But now the whole conversation is steered in a different direction. And it doesn't mean you can't ask, but you have to ask in a certain way that's not leading or the worst are what are called double-barreled questions, where it's actually two questions in one. So tell me about this, why and how, all in one. And so when you get your response, you have no idea, which they were actually responding to. That's more for surveys and less for interviews.
Yes.
But these become really important because you want to get accurate data. And the only way you're going to get accurate data is by asking questions that either are not leading to those responses, are not double-barreled, and are also in, again, and this is so important and it's so hard to get this across, you want to build trust as they go further in the journey, because we all have our walls, right? Even if you know somebody, sometimes that's actually a harder situation because now you come with expectations. Is this going to damage the relationship? Is this going to get back to so-and-so? What does this mean down the road for this? Like, those are all things that go through our heads. And what we're trying to do is get past those to get those genuine answers. And it's tough, and it takes practice and time.
Yeah. Okay. So many good points. So let me pick up on a couple of them. So look at, again, I'm going to use a quantitative example here. If instead of saying rate your satisfaction of the service you've received from 0 to 10, where 0 is very poor and 10 is very good, you say from 5 to 10, where 5 was good and 10 is excellent, would be an example of leading them in a really stupid example, but just making it really clear. On the other hand, as you would say, like, what you could do maybe in a qualitative situation is maybe get them to agree with a statement beforehand that then puts them in a position where they've really got to answer a certain way to the next question, which is your real question. So, I'm sure you would agree with me, as indeed with almost everybody, that one of the most important things in a product is X. And then they're like pretty much having to say yes to that. And then you ask them the question you want to get a particular answer to. and because you said that's really important, you said, so which of these things would you consider as important? Or which of these other things would you consider important? And then they're listing the others, but you've already said this other one, and they've got no choice in saying, well, no, it's really not important to me.
Right.
Those are the sorts of things, and I know I'm being like a bit of a blunderbuss with it, sledgehammer with it, but actually, there's much more subtlety in this. It takes a trained and qualified person actually to write a good interview or survey either, right?
Absolutely. And that's the whole point. It's okay to start out with questions like that. When I started 20 plus years ago, I'm sure if I could find my original, what was that?
All data is good, right? I mean, any data is better than none.
Right. But then, as with anything, you learn and you realize, I can add this, or I can come from this perspective. The biggest thing that you're trying to do is build trust. Okay. And you have to get past that, our reptilian brain, however you want to look at it, where we want to know, even for something as seemingly innocuous as a survey, well, we want to know, can I trust this? Can I not? And it's just, if we go just like to NPS, let's just say like, it's just the scale from, 0 to 10 and whatever it is. So there's no qualitative part to it. If you're answering that, you've answered it before, the company's never told you anything, there's been no closing of the loop. Well, why, you're just going to give an answer. There's not much vested in it. So if you add the text box to it, now you can understand a little more why they decided to choose the answer they did. And then from there, you can ask them for an interview. And it's not just for like the detractors, because that's always the common thing. We just go with the detractors. You have like this whole middle ground of passives. Why are they passive? Why are they sort of ambivalent? Is it because something happened right before they took the survey? Is it, they're just starting to go off track and aren't interested? Is it because you've never closed the loop and they don't trust that the response that they're going to give is actually going to make a difference. Like, so that's why it's so important to not just focus on the number, but the why behind the number. And then also look at how many people are actually taking the survey. If you're sending it out to 10,000 and you only get 100 responses back, I would say that that's very poor data. And you should really be looking at, okay, should we be asking this? Should we be sending the survey out? Or is there another way that we can get the information we're looking to get?
Yeah, absolutely. And I personally, I have a lot of issues around NPS. Not that I don't think that it can be useful, which I do, but I just think it's very poorly applied in a lot of circumstances. It's used like I mean, if you were a carpenter or an engineer or whatever, you carry around a big bag full of tools, right? It's like you call a carpenter in, or you call somebody in to fix your home, and they bring their toolbox, and when they open it out, there's just one hammer in it. And that's all there is. And then they'll go, right, what do you want hammered? And that's all they've got. They've got no screwdrivers, they've got no saws, they've got no sandpaper. They've got nothing else. They've just got a hammer. And that's what it feels like to me. Is like NPS tells you everything when it doesn't. It really doesn't, as you said. And actually, it's not so much even like that. It tells you lots. But it's very easily misinterpreted, or even just not interpretable at all, and it is only appropriate in certain situations and circumstances. It just does not work in all of them, is my feeling, and it sounds like you would agree with that.
Yeah, actually, I was just going to say I had a poll. This is interesting. I put a poll on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago, and the question was, should we stop using NPS? That was the question. Yes, no, maybe were the three choices you had. 360 people voted. And this was a surprising, I was like really shocked. 50% said, no, we should not stop using NPS.
Yeah, no, I believe that. Absolutely believe
that.
No,
and I was a little surprised. We had well over 100 plus comments. It really stirred, people really seemed entrenched in their camps.
NPS,
right?
Loyalty.
Yeah, I was surprised.
Absolutely. Okay, so let me, having jumped onto my hobby horse of NPS and why it's not as good as everybody seems to think it is, let me come, which is unfair on NPS, because it is great if used in the right circumstances, etc. And maybe we get you back and we'll talk just about that sometime. But let's get back on track here, because one of the things that you mentioned earlier is that you've got sort of two ways for quantitatively, you do your survey, whatever that is. Right, so you've done your survey, and the good thing about that is it gives you if you survey enough people, it gives you a meaningful average. What it doesn't do is give you any detail about the average. Hence, you use it first as your sort of scattergun to see where the issues lie, but then you need to put that hammer away, right, and bring out your more sensitive, delicate set of tools to understand things better than that. And you mentioned that effectively you've got a couple of options. You've got interview and you've got focus groups. Now, in my software as a service company, we actually, alongside the software as a service, which was around well-being and issues of mental well-being at work, and we used exactly this process: quantitative surveying anonymously online using our tool, followed then by follow-up, both interviews and particularly focus groups with different teams within the organization. And because this was around well-being at work and mental well-being, there was a lot of sensitivity, as I'm sure you can imagine, around anonymity and in what they were going to say in the focus group, not getting back to certain people, and so on and so forth. So tell me about what is an interview and what is a focus group. What's the difference?
Okay. So an interview is one-on-one, and focus groups are one-to-many. Mm-hmm. You can have a focus group as small as 5 people, or you could have a focus group as big as 30 or 40. Mm-hmm. Starts getting a little unwieldy at that number, but you could. Generally, best practices for focus groups 20 and under. 15 is probably the nicest number to get people to participate. And what you're doing in both cases is, like you said, you're trying to find out the why behind the numbers. You're trying to get context. You're trying to get understanding. You're trying to also, and this is the big part that people miss, humans are driven by emotions. We make decisions based on emotion. It's trying to understand what the emotions are, not just around the product and the service. What does success mean to them? How does it feel? And I've seen some really great interviews, which the questions look wonderful. But if you're never getting and touching into some of those feelings, then you're never going to get the true responses of what's going on. If everything's always great on the surface, like a duck on water on the surface, everything's smooth, but its feet are just going like crazy underneath. That's what you're trying to find out. What's going on underneath the surface? And you got to tap into feelings. There's got to be some discussion about the good feelings and the bad feelings. And that's where a lot of interviews really, they miss the mark, because it's tough. It's tough to talk about emotions, especially if you really don't know the person that you're speaking to, either in the focus groups or in the interviews one-to-one.